and welcome to our virtual annual discipline-specific activity for the 2021-22 school year. For those of you who do not know me, I am Kaylee Malsey, the Associate Dean of School Partnerships. Thank you for participating in our ACE annual discipline-specific activity. As the pandemic continues to influence our yearly activities, we are pleased that we are able to still provide you with an opportunity to complete our NACEP required activities in a platform where you can make a connection to your liaison. Throughout the fall, ACE liaisons scheduled live Zoom sessions to discuss specific topics related to the disciplines in which you teach. While we understand that it is not always possible for you to attend the live sessions, these sessions were recorded so you can get the benefit of the event with the discussion from those who attended. Please enjoy the recording of your annual discipline-specific activity. We hope next year we will be able to welcome you back to our campus for an in-person event. Thank you for your continued hard work in making this program available to students.
Which is in Primary 2, Core English 1, English 2. You have, if there's some want to discuss another, about another core, please feel free to jump in and ask your question. But mainly we're looking at two writing courses here. Now, English 200 also has a literature component. It's an introduction to literature that's joined with a writing course. But, and English 205, I know one of us here is teaching English 205. That's also a writing course. It's basically a different kind of second level composition from English 200. English 200 is one route that colleges take, and English 205 or research writing is the other route. So we're going to look at I'm just going to review some things about grading. I'm going to talk about the difference between grading and assessing, and then a little bit about teaching as well. So probably you've seen this before. I think I've used it before in these presentations. This is an example of kind of a classic set of grading criteria for essays. And it's so old that they're calling the essay a theme, which is a little bit more archaic term for it. But what do you have in an A essay or theme? Well, it develops a point logically and in clear, well-constructed paragraphs that have transitions. Its generalizations are supported by effective use of details and examples, apt and incisive use of words, and free of mechanical and grammatical errors. So an A paper in this view is a very good paper, a paper that has very few flaws, and it doesn't have any serious flaws. What's a B essay? Well, it's almost as good as the A essay, but not original. It has most of the virtues of an A theme, but marked more by competence than by originality. Now, I have to admit that I don't expect large amounts of originality from beginning writing students. But I do find that some people, they're fairly good at developing a point logically. Maybe their detail isn't as good, or their use of standard English isn't as good. That's usually how I look at a B essay. C, this is an essay that has a central idea, but its development is vague and generalized. It may be correctly expressed, but trite. It may, on the other hand, be organized and fairly interesting, but clumsily expressed. Generally, I find when I'm grading an essay as a C, its structure is almost there, but often there's a problem with structure. The student is having trouble understanding the idea of supporting the point with a topic sentence. Usually a C theme is also somewhat weak in detail, and it also has mechanical and grammatical errors. Now D, flimsy thesis, poor organization. Paragraphs or sketchy parts of a list are long and inchoate. In other words, very disorganized, serious errors in expression. Well, it's hard to do better than that description. An F for theme that has no discernible thesis is garbled in thoughts and expression. It makes serious errors in grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Now, this outline says several serious errors. I've had essays that were 2 pages long that had 40, 50 or more errors. That's usually going to be a pretty poor grade. A theme should also receive an F if it fails to follow the assignment. And that's actually something else that we should all consider when we're looking at essays. What was the assignment and did the student actually fulfill it? Because that does make a difference in college writing, not just at the entry level in basic composition, but in all the levels of college writing. So this is a slightly idealized setup, but it gives you the basic idea. We shouldn't be giving A's to papers that really aren't meeting most of the criteria that we expect to see in a really good paper. So what are these qualities? Well, here's my take on this, the structure of the essay. There's a strong thesis statement in the introductory paragraph. It fits the content of the essay. The essay has clear topic sentences that support the thesis and state the point of each paragraph. So that's the basic structure and organization. So we should be able to see that every part of the essay actually backs up the main idea that the student is making. And then support. The essay has detailed, specific, and relevant support in every topic sentence. The essay has sufficient support. Well, I guess I shouldn't have said in every topic sentence, in every supporting paragraph. But the topic sentence definitely supports the thesis, so the reader can immediately see how it relates to that thesis statement, and that we have enough detail in that supporting paragraph to really get the ideas across to the reader. It's hard for students to comprehend the concept of being really specific. One of the assignments that I often use is the example essay, and that's just an essay that uses exemplification as the form of development. And one of the assignments prompts that I give to students is to write a character sketch of a person they know. And it's so frequent that I'll have someone say that a friend or a family member is really funny. And the entire supporting paragraph consists of, gee, my best friend is really funny. She's so funny. She always makes me laugh. She really does funny things. And at the end of it, I have no idea what kind of funniness this person has. And it's very difficult to get students to pin themselves down. And I'll just ask them, well, what was something your friend did that was so funny? Describe that. Is there a joke that your friend told that was really funny? Tell us the joke. Let us see your friend's hilariousness in action. And it's good to encourage students to become specific in personal essays, because then in the research paper, they'll be able to recognize the level of detail that they're dealing with in their sources, and they'll be able to be a little bit more specific in the kind of support that they choose there as well. And then the grammar and mechanics area, the essay should be clear and readable, standard English grammar and usage are present, the level of formality is suitable to the assignment. It's not essential to require a high level of formality in personal essays. So there's nothing wrong with allowing the use of contractions or informal English in a personal essay, but the research paper is different, and students need to be shown what more formal language looks like. And that's something that you can help them to see. The highest level of formality that the students have to achieve in English Composition 1 is the research paper. But there are other kinds of assignments at the college level that need formality. A lab report is a good example of this. Anybody that takes a science course with a lab has to do a lab report. And lab reports aren't written informally with a lot of slang and all that. They have a very distinct structure, and they require a high level of formality. If a student in college is going to take a business writing course, most business writing courses will require them to create a formal report for the workplace. And formal reports have a greater level of formality of language than an email, for example, would have. So learning how to be a little more formal is a helpful skill for the students to take into their future, both in college and in the workplace. And by the way, this is something that I think it's a good idea to stress to your students. They may tend to think that what they learn in English Composition 1 is just English Composition 1. You know, what happens in English Comp 1 stays there. It really doesn't. Just remind them every so often that the skills that they learn in English Composition 1 are skills that will help them in future college courses and in the workplace, in the world outside of college. Clear, concrete, readable writing is really helpful no matter where the students end up. It's helpful in academia, it's helpful in the workplace as well. All right, now the other element of grading in Comp 1 is the qualities that relate to a particular assignment. So you want to make sure that the essay meets the requirements of the assignment for both length and content. It's very interesting the effect that word processors and computers have had on writing, because it used to be really hard for students to get up to the word limit, and now they want to go over the word limit. It's so much easier to produce those words. You have to excuse me, I've been teaching for over 40 years, so I've really seen a lot of changes, not so much in how students perform in writing classes, but in the kinds of problems they have. That has changed over the years. So make sure that the students understand the length and content requirements, and then try to make sure that when you grade the essays, you're considering what those requirements are. So in the case of the short essays in the course, then what are the particular requirements of the rhetorical mode for that essay? So in a narrative essay, you need to look at pacing, which is essentially devoting more detail to the elements of the narrative, the story, that are more relevant to the thesis statement that the student has in mind, and less detail to elements that are not important. If you're having the students write a description, sensory detail is an essential. If you're dealing with cause and effect, reasonable treatment of cause and effect, not excessively dogmatic, for example. In comparison and contrast, I don't know about you, but when I teach comparison and contrast, I put the most emphasis on organization. Comparison contrast is a useful essay to do to get ready for the research paper, because it involves a little bit more complexity in the organizational structure. And I think it's good for students to give that a try. And then in argumentation, refutation of opposing arguments, and a thesis which states the writer's position. I don't know what you run into in the argument essay. I find that students are very reluctant to actually come out and take a position on an issue. They want to write a pros and cons paper. And there is such a thing as a pros and cons paper. Sometimes you do need to just lay out what the two sides say, but an argument actually is supposed to indicate the writer's viewpoint and support for the writer's viewpoint and response to opposing views. And sometimes students struggle with that. If you do a division and classification paper, I haven't done that for quite a while, but it's certainly a legitimate type of rhetorical mode to use. Clear basis for the classification, and an exemplification, a suitable selection of examples. Now, what about the research paper? I decided to just list some of the elements of the research paper that I like to emphasize and that I think are important for the students. So one of them is to try to make the research paper analytical and not just informational. Now, certainly every information that the student wants to share with the readers, but in the research paper for English 110, try to encourage the students to develop their own idea based on the material that they're reading. And try to encourage them to start with a research question. That's one way to make the paper more analytical. Another way is to simply ask them to use a simple form of analysis like causal analysis. You can ask them to look at debatable or discussable elements of their topic. What is it, for example, if they're doing a history related paper, what are the historians arguing about? And then what does the student think about that discussion? Where does the student come in? What's the student's view based on the sources? At this level, I'm not expecting very, very in-depth analysis, but I want to see some evidence that the student is thinking about the material and not just spitting it out. You know, what we don't want is the students to only be writing down a lot of facts that they found, even if they're well organized. We want them to think about the facts and what their implications are. What's the meaning of these texts? What conclusion can I draw? That's what we want to see. The quality of the sources. Practically everybody now first goes to Google when they're doing research. It's understandable, and it's a very easy way to get information. But the difficult thing with just a straight Google search is the quality of the sources. Now, I'm going to talk about this again later, but for now, let me just say, if students want to use Google, encourage them to use Google Scholar, which has higher quality sources. And you also are able to access our library's online databases. We have a very nice set of databases from EBSCOhost, and it really has a lot of great material for your students, and your students can access this for free. The length of the research paper, I actually require about 1,500 words in both English 110 and English 200. Now, I don't normally think about it in terms of words, but basically I ask students for a minimum of 5 full pages in 12-point Times New Roman with a 1-inch margin, which is roughly 1,500 words. And then I want to see some evidence of critical thinking. Again, this isn't a doctoral dissertation, but I want to see that the students have taken some thought in weighing their sources. Let's say that they have 2 sources that disagree. Have they found some reason to think that one is more accurate than the other? And then accurate, clear, and sufficient documentation, and a works cited or references list. This is an absolute essential. I'll be saying this later too, but basically, if there is no works cited or references list in the research paper, it can't possibly be an A research paper, and it probably shouldn't be a pass research paper. Learning documentation is one of the fundamental outcomes of this course. And in our to use sources with sufficient and clear documentation, it's one of the major things that other instructors in other courses expect us to take care of for them. They expect that we've covered this. That's its place in the curriculum. All right, more about that later. What else does the research paper need? Appropriate transitions, a good, reasonable structure, a clear thesis statement. Now, avoiding excessive quotation. The great temptation for students is to quote because it's so much easier than paraphrasing, isn't it? I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I thought paraphrasing was really difficult. It hasn't really gotten that much easier because in order to paraphrase, you have to completely understand material, and then you have to give it your own words. And wow, that's very challenging, but the students really need to learn how to paraphrase because they should not be quoting everything, okay? Even in MLA, you shouldn't overdo it. In APA, in the social sciences, you're encouraged not to quote unless you really have to. That means that the students have to learn how to paraphrase. And I'm happy to say that I've seen most of you doing a great job of teaching paraphrase to your students. They also need to know that material that's not common knowledge has to be documented. And here's another thing that they need to know. They need to know that this isn't just our little quirk in English 110. This is the standard in American colleges and universities. And the sooner that they understand that, the better. And then a substantially correct works cited or references list it also needs. Okay, so what do we have in an A research paper? To get an A, the paper must have both in-text citations and either a works cited or a references list. Now, generally, when I teach English 110, I have the students do an MLA research paper. And it's certainly all right if you do that. The course curriculum requires you to teach both MLA and APA. And the reason for that in our curriculum is that most students have to take social sciences, so they will have to know APA for other classes. Some professors who teach English Composition 1 have the students choose whether to do an MLA or an APA based on the subject matter. So if they're doing a paper about something in psychology, they'll use 2 APA. If they're doing a paper about something in history, they'll use MLA or literature. They'll use MLA. So you may handle this whichever way you like. All right. Now, an A paper has to meet the length requirement. It should have a clear and suitable thesis statement and a clear and logical organization. It should make sense. And the transitions contribute to that too. As we read an A paper, we feel that everything's fitting together and that we aren't having much trouble understanding it. There have to be enough in-text citations, and there has to be a match between the in-text citations and the works cited or references list so that you can check this off. Now, so this is what an A paper looks like, and therefore it's fairly probable that not absolutely every paper that you grade will be an A. All right, and if it's not, that's okay. Now, what else do you have in an A research paper? It should be written in standard English with a formal tone. Here are the elements of formality in the tone. The student shouldn't use slang and colloquial expressions. The student shouldn't use informal usage. Contractions, second person pronouns, that means you, not in quoted passages, and should not use contractions. I have a short PowerPoint about formality and tone. If anybody wants it, just email me and I'll send it to you. And you should use quotations and paraphrases effectively in an A paper. All right, again, it's not perfection, it's competence. It's that the basic essentials are all there in an A research paper. Okay, now this is my grading rubric for the research paper, and you'll see that it looks a little different from the grid format rubrics that I share for the short essays. This just shows the three areas that I look at when I grade and how I grade in them. So content is the thesis, the topic sentences, transitional sentences, organization and support, and the length of the paper. Now you notice that I take off 5 points for every missing page, and I make the paper worth 100 points. So that's half of a letter grade. As you can well imagine, the 5 points taken off, because gee, only 4 pages instead of 5, and all I'm taking off is -5. Well, the truth is that I do that to signify to the students that I'm serious about the length, but generally somebody who can't make it to 5 pages is having other problems too. So the fact that it's 4 pages, that doesn't indicate they're just going to get an A-, far from it. All right, evaluation of documentation. Are there enough citations? Is the MLA format right? Is there plagiarism, and how significant is it? Now, here's what I want to show you in this area. If there's no documentation at all, I take 50 points off the top, and that's an F. Documentation is one of the major elements here, everybody, okay? No documentation at all means no sources are mentioned in the paper, even though they're used. They're not mentioned, there's no citation, and there is no works cited or references list at all. I'm sorry, but if a paper doesn't have any in-text citation and it doesn't have any bibliography of any kind, no works cited list, no references list if you're using APA, that's not a passing paper. That does not come even close to meeting the course requirements. All right, I take off 20 points if the student documents only quotations, but there's an additional nuance here because this is based on a careful reading of the student's paper. If there's one quotation per page, and that's the only thing that's being documented, and the rest of the paper is clearly using a large amount of paraphrase and size material, that's when I dock at 20 points. If you look and you see, well, is there a lot here that's not being documented? The answer is yes, then that's when I invoke that penalty. The -30 for lack of critical citations mean there are no in-text citations at all. And by the way, as I'm sure you all realize, if a student is cited a website and it doesn't have page numbering, the student doesn't need to give a page. And if the author or title is mentioned in the text, that's an in-text citation. It's not just citations in parentheses. So -30 means there aren't any, there are none at all. I give a grade of 0 for papers that are essentially stolen papers, that are completely plagiarized. And in the grammatical area, I have a formula. You don't have to use it, but it's what I use in every one of my students' papers. And so they're familiar with that formula, and it does not surprise them. I had a question recently about plagiarism software, and as far as I know, my college doesn't subscribe to it. At one time we had Turnitin. We don't have it anymore. However, Google is actually very, very useful for detecting papers that are outright plagiarized. Generally, the more experience you have in reading student research papers, the more of a feel you'll get for when a student is actually engaging in the theft of an online paper. They're passing a complete paper off as their own. Also, you will know from reading other papers by that student, right? You know what the student should sound like. And when the research paper doesn't sound just more formal and a little more dressed up, but actually sounds completely unlike your student's normal writing, then that's a red flag that should send you to Google with a couple of significant passages, put them in quotation marks, put them in the Google search window, and just see what you find. And generally, you'll find your instincts are good. A student really shouldn't get away with stealing an entire paper. And I try to emphasize to my students that I catch people doing this every semester. I shouldn't say plural. Some semesters it's only one person, but in some semesters I've caught several people trying this, and they really must not do it. All right, now, so far I've been talking about grading. And this is the process in which we decide what grade level a student should earn. Before we go on to assessment, let me just say that the point of grading is feedback. You want the student to have an idea of what elements the student has mastered and what elements the student has not mastered. There's nothing mean or vindictive about this. It's just, well, here's what you have. You earned this part, but you didn't earn this part. And that feedback is useful to students. Now, assessment is a different process from grading in this context in what we're discussing here tonight. Assessment is something that's required by Middle States, our accreditor. And in every academic year, the English department will select some aspects of the course. What I'm referring to here is English 110 and also English 200. We have common assessments for those courses. Now, on our college campus, English 110 assessment happens in both fall and spring because we have many sections of English 110, both fall and spring. Common assessment of English 200 takes place only in the spring semester on campus, because that's the only time that we run multiple sections of English 200. However, if you are an ACE instructor, assessment of English 200 will happen in the fall for you if you're teaching English 200 as a fall course. Now, how does assessment work in the ACE program? Probably most of you are already familiar with this, but essentially in any year in which you receive an ACE visit, that's when you will be assessed. Your course will be assessed. And that means that for most of you, I think it's about every 3 years, you'll have to participate in the common assessment. On campus, we do it continually every year. But in the ACE program, it depends on whether you've had a visit or not. Now, I did 3 of the ACE visits this semester, and other people are doing other ACE visits, and I'll be contacting them soon to find out who received an ACE visit this semester for first semester course. Now, if you're teaching an English 110 that is only for the fall semester, then I will assess your English 110 papers in with the fall semester. If your ACE course runs for the entire academic year, that course will be assessed in the spring semester, regardless of which semester somebody visited you. So if you have a visit this year and your course runs for the whole year, you owe us some assessment materials at the end of that year. Does anybody have any questions about this process? I should probably try to check the chat. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. Now, we plan assessment based on looking at one or more of the course outcomes listed in the course syllabus, and the assessment relates to that outcome. And we generally, over the course of years, we change these a little bit. For a long time in English 110, I assessed the argument essay, and some of you may even have had assessment as research paper, but I don't try to look at every aspect of the research paper. I generally choose just a few aspects. I generally choose just a few aspects to look at each year. Now, the grade that you give the research paper is not the same as the score in the assessment, because the assessment just looks at part of the paper. The grade looks at the entire paper. All right, so assessment in English 110. Now, take a look at the right side of the screen here. These are the three major outcomes that are related to the research paper. So the student will be able to write a thesis support essay in standard English. Well, actually, that doesn't relate to the research paper. That's the research paper. The other two do. The student will be able to conduct research, and the student will be able to write an analytical research paper using standard English grammar and usage as evidenced by the following. Now, I'm not sure. I think that the version of the syllabus that's currently out there does say 1,000 words. It may say 1,500. I generally require 1,500, but anyway. And then as I said in the past, I used to assess English 110 by using the argument essay. And that was a thesis support essay of 500 words or more. So that was what I used to use. So that could happen again in the future. You may one day end up doing assessment on one of the short essays for the course. Now, the common assessment rubric is on the left, and this is just 6 questions. Does all the evidence relate to the thesis? Does some evidence relate, but not all? Or is the evidence mostly irrelevant to the thesis? 2 points for virtually all evidence relates to the thesis. 1 point for some, but not all evidence. And 0 points for very little or none of the evidence relates to the thesis. Now, listen carefully. The idea of assessment is that we're really looking to see in these particular areas, did we hit the mark with most of the students? If we look at the overall scores, the overall score going to be 70% or above. That's what we're looking at. I don't use assessment rubric to test your teaching. All right. It has nothing to do with that. It's for both you and I to see, well, were these concepts sufficiently developed so that the student pretty much got the basics? That's what we're looking at. I don't, on campus or in ACE, I don't look at the assessment scores and say, oh, these are high, so this teacher did a good job. It's really more just a matter of saying, well, next semester, do I need to take more care with the amount of evidence? It's really for you yourself to decide what's working and what isn't working. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid to say that a student didn't get this part. Just be honest. Are the connections to the thesis clearly indicated in the paper? Yes, 2 points, sometimes 1 point, no, 0 points. Just be honest. Maybe it's a really good paper in most ways, but the student just didn't connect anything to the thesis. Give it a 0. Okay, this isn't the student's grade. This is just looking at that one little element. Is there sufficient evidence? Yes, if it's just great. In some parts of the paper, but not others, 1 point, no, 0 points. Is the organization paper appropriate? Yes, 2 points, sometimes 1 point, no, 0 points. The idea is here that you're asking yourself these questions about each of these little elements, and then do topic sentences and transitional sentences make appropriate connections? Yes, sometimes no. Okay, then assessment of the entire paper. Logical, and is the use of evidence reasonable? Yes, sometimes no. And you decide these. This is so you can see that all of these questions relate to the question of evidence and evidence as it supports the thesis in a reasonable way and an organized way. So it's really just one aspect of the paper, and you might actually have an A paper that doesn't get 2 points on every one of these. I frequently do. That's not a problem, and it doesn't mean that you did a bad job, all right? So do try to just take a dispassionate approach. Now, I generally fill in these assessments, well, obviously you kind of have to. Once I've graded the paper, then I sit down and I do the assessments for all of them. Now, I usually have 25 students in my English Comp 1 classes. It's true that some of them will drop out as the semester goes on, but I have a lot of students, and I know that people are a very small group of students. But just answer the questions honestly. If the student had a weakness in the paper, it's okay to admit it. I'm not going to hold it against you, okay? Does anybody have any questions about this assessment rubric? And by the way, this is the one that we're using this year. Okay. Now, I actually already covered this. I'm sorry, I sort of got carried away. I just want to make sure, just be honest in this and give yourself some data that you can use to see if there's something that you might want to do differently in the future. All right. Now, here's the assessment for English 200. And over on the right, once again, these are the major outcomes for English 200. You'll find these in the course syllabus that we send to you. Recognize and apply literary terms and concepts related to fiction, poetry, and drama. Analyze and discuss literary works. Notice that we have here the assignment of exams, short essays, and an analytical research paper. And then conduct literary research, and that involves the outline of bibliography and then the research paper project itself. So understanding literary terms and concepts and applying them, analyzing and discussing literary works, conducting literary research. So now we see the English 200 assessment. We look at the thesis statement again, but now it's in regards to, well, actually in English 100, we're not actually assessing the thesis statement. It's just how it's supported that we're looking at. So does the thesis statement present the student's interpretation of a literary work, which is what it should be in a literature paper? Yes, 2 points. Partially. Thesis statement is unclear, an announcement of purpose or scope or covers only part of the essay, 1 point. Again, don't be afraid to go with 1 point or even with just a no answer about this. The announcement of purpose. In this paper, I will discuss the theme of Edgar Allan Poe's The Purloined Letter. I will discuss as the announcement of purpose or scope. That's the only thesis there is. That is a flaw. Has the student made a valid interpretation of the literary text? Yes, partially, and no. Again, you'll assign points based on what you actually think about this. Students are beginners in literary interpretation. It's perfectly understandable that a student might make a mistake. So if an interpretation is not valid, feel free to go with partially. Has the student included sufficient quotations from the literary text to support the thesis? Yes. Partially? No. How well does the student blend literary quotations into the essay? Very well, adequately, poorly. This is how the student incorporates the quotations into the text. Is the quotation introduced appropriately? Is the quotation discussed appropriately? Has the student selected relevant and authoritative secondary sources for support? Yes, partially, and no. And then does the student use literary terms correctly? And here we have outcome 1, okay? All the other questions relate to 2 and 3, but outcome 1 is about literary terms. Yes, sometimes no. I found personally that in teaching English 200, one of the hardest literary terms to get students to understand is metaphor. I don't have any of you had that experience. Getting students to think metaphorically and to understand what a metaphor is very difficult. So yes, sometimes students do struggle with using literary terminology correctly. Okay, so what you're going to do, once you've answered the questions and you have your point values, you're entering those point values in a spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and we use the same spreadsheet every year because it doesn't have the questions in it. It just has a space for question 1, question 2, question 3, and so on. And excuse me, you will be filling in the students' names, and you'll be filling in your name and the name of your class and all that. And then you'll just put these numbers into the rows and columns of the spreadsheet. Basically, what you're going to have is a row for each student, and across the row, you'll answer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. If anybody has any difficulties using this spreadsheet, just ask about it, and I'll be happy to help you out. Okay, then the next thing that's part of assessment is this. Middle States requires us to collect samples of student work from all classes that we assess. And ideally, what we want is an A sample, a C sample, and an F sample. But of course, in a really ideal world, there won't be any Fs, right? Now, your situation here is a little bit different from mine, because in my Comp 1 classes, and even in Comp 2, a community college is an open admissions institution, and we get students with all different backgrounds, all different levels of preparation. And so I often do have an F paper. You know, the student may have tried and simply not been able to get that far in one semester, whatever. And I know that your situation is usually that you're teaching the best students in your school. However, even the best students can have an off day. I don't know about you, but I remember that when I took freshman composition, I got C's on papers. I was shocked. But that's the college level. The college level is a different level. You know, I always got A's in high school. I got some C's on my papers in college. Now, in the end, I graduated with highest honors. So I did okay, but there was a learning curve. Even the best students can have a bad day, and you need to be honest in assessing. So anyway, let's say that you don't have an F paper. One thing that you could do, because the aim of the samples, it's to show people what your grades mean. What do you consider an A paper? What do you consider a C or an average paper? What do you consider an F paper, a paper that shouldn't pass? If a student hands in a rough draft that would be an F, you can use that as your F sample. Okay. Alternatively, you can just give me 3 samples, but just label them. Which one is the best? Which one is the middle? Which one is not as good? You can also use excellent, fair, and poor as designation. Now, in my English 110 course, an F on the research paper means an F for the course, because that is a really major component of the course. You are under no obligation to do the same thing. But I do want you to think carefully about how you're grading research papers. Now, I'm going to go back to the previous screen just for a moment. It sometimes happens that when I receive sample papers, I will need to talk to you about the grading levels of your papers. Please don't be offended by this, but sometimes I'll need to talk to you about college level grading. For example, I do occasionally receive a paper that's marked as an A paper that doesn't have any documentation. I'm sorry, if there's no documentation, that's not an A. It's not even a C, okay? Even if it should have some documentation in it. If there's none at all, that paper is an F. It's not a C paper. A paper with a research paper that doesn't document any of the research, that's not a passing grade. So I don't quibble too much about, well, maybe I wouldn't consider this an A, but maybe it would be a B or a C. But I do want to make sure that you understand what an F paper is. And if there's no documentation, that paper is not an A or C level paper. So I will follow up with you, because basically we're asked the question when we evaluate ACE courses, is the grading and material equivalent to what we see in the college classroom? And I don't know that till I receive sample papers. That's the only real way that I have of ascertaining, you know, what is the level of the course. But I just want to warn you that no documentation at all. That's not an A, and that's not a C. All right, that's an F paper for a college course. All right, so now, yes, you are teaching a college course. So when students take your ACE course, it's very, they're sitting in a high school classroom, but don't tell them now, when you're in college, you have to do this. When they take an ACE class from you, they're in a college classroom. You are a college instructor and they are college students. College is now. It's not in the future. It's not what they'll be doing in a couple of years. It's now. And in an effort to create the college atmosphere, avoid the excessive use of extra credit. Now, I think almost every instructor uses extra credit to some degree, but you want to make sure that the grade that students receive is based primarily on their performance. Did they achieve the course objectives? Did they learn what they need to learn in the course? Why is this a big deal? Well, it's the last bullet item there. A student who earns credit from our college and transfers it for Comp 1 won't need to take Comp 1 at a four-year college that they may attend, or at a community college for that matter. They won't need to take Comp 1 again. You are giving them their basic instruction in college composition, and if they don't get it, they may well fail in their next course. There's some evidence to show that students who do very poorly in composition, they pass it, but they do poorly, have trouble completing a college degree. So take your responsibility seriously. The student's success in their next college course will depend on what they've learned in your course. So it's an important course for them. Encourage students to meet deadlines, take deadlines seriously. Many students, I get a lot of students who write a comparison contrast essay about high school versus college, and what many of them will say is, I never needed to meet a deadline in high school. Well, that's not really good. That's not a good preparation for the workplace, and it's not a good preparation for college either. You might want to try something that I use, and I just throw this out there as a suggestion. I found this in reading some material. I offer a one-time essay amnesty. So the students have to write 5 short essays in a semester. They can have a 3-day amnesty for one of them for any reason at their request. They don't have to tell me why. They don't have to have like a good reason, okay? They get a 3-day amnesty once. They have to tell me about it before the deadline. They contact me to tell me that they want the amnesty, and then they get 3 extra days to do that paper. One time, and one time only. And of course, I think most instructors in college and outside of it will make some accommodations if the student has a death in the immediate family, for example, or if the student's been in the hospital, another good example. Yes, we can make allowances for that, but we don't want deadlines to seem completely elastic. They shouldn't be. And the students are earning college credit, see that they do earn it. And the way to earn it is through performance. And that's why using too much extra credit is not a good idea. All right. Now, this is just I do sometimes get questions, frequently asked questions. I get questions about library resources. Yes, you and your students have access to the Penn Highlands library databases. We subscribe to EBSCOhost, which has a very large number of excellent academic articles and ebooks, okay? All you need to do to get the login for your school is to contact Alex Kirby or Barbara Zaborowski, our librarians. And what you see on the screen, you see their email addresses and their phone numbers. And feel free to take a minute and jot those down. That information is also available on the college website at College Directory. You will find their names there, and you can easily get this information there too. And of course, if you forget later or misplace your notes, feel free to ask me about this. I did help one teacher to get her students into the Penn Highlands databases this semester, and it's available to all of you. It's a great resource for your students that makes their research opportunities so much greater and so much more at the college level. Now, obviously, you shouldn't skip regular print books either. Encourage students to use interlibrary loan. That's available through any library, the public library, and presumably your school library as well. Interlibrary loan is one of the greatest inventions of all time because people can get great resources in the terms of books, absolutely free. Access Pennsylvania allows you to search the entire state. And I think most public libraries participate in some form of interlibrary loan. So encourage students to use that too, but they can also get books in electronic form from EBSCO. So don't forget this terrific resource for your students' papers. Now, part 2, encourage your students to use peer-reviewed journals when possible. It's not always possible because sometimes they're too difficult to read. And this is something that any college student in the first or second year may run into. However, sometimes they are quite readable and you want them to use peer-reviewed journals, scholarly journals, whenever you can. Another way to access scholarly journals is Google Scholar. And so if students really want to use Google, get them to use Google Scholar instead. It's part of Google and it works the same way, but it will get you to much better quality resources. Let me see here. Okay. Don't allow students to use web sources that are completely anonymous. This is sources like Wikipedia. There's no author, no organization vetting the information. It could be great, it could be terrible. No completely anonymous web sources. So if there's no author and the website is not sponsored by an organization that's legitimate, then don't allow students to use those sources. Blog entries aren't usually a very good source, except in certain very narrow circumstances. I point out to students that .gov and .edu in the web address is a hint that there's a sponsoring organization that they need to look for, and those are okay. But you really do need to encourage students to move beyond websites. I know this is hard. We're also used to just typing something into Google and then we're done, but college level research doesn't work that way. Students really need to learn to use something other than simple websites. And the difficulty with websites as a research source is that often they have the same 5 facts in every website. There's a lot more to research than just Google. All right, does anyone have any questions for me? You may unmute yourself, or maybe you want to type it in the chat. I don't see any questions there yet. Does anybody have a question now? I know I was really long-winded. No.
I do have a quick question.
Okay.
So this is more of, I guess, I know that I personally had very mixed impressions from professors in my education on Metadiscourse. I didn't know how PHCC felt about students using that. I know that it can be really tricky because it almost borders that, getting out of the idea of third person. But I just wanted to see kind of your opinion on using Metadiscourse and how much that should be discouraged.
Okay, well, explain to me how it was used in your educational experience.
So
what did your professors ask you to do?
It was very discouraged in my undergrad, but when I went to my master's degree and as I was writing my thesis, my thesis advisor encouraged the use of Metadiscourse to make difficult concepts much more available to readers and to make them clearer. And some of my students might, like in our last paper, they said, we can see here that in the text it says this and it means this, right? Okay. I know that's not a great example because that's coming right off the top of my head. But I did see that, and I didn't dock many points because I didn't specifically say not to do that when we were going over basics of papers. But going forward, I just want to make sure that if that's kind of a gray area that I could just avoid it, or if it's okay, then I can kind of keep letting them do
I'd say that's up to you whether you consider it useful or not. Generally in the research paper, I don't want students to use first person except when they're discussing personal experience, and I guess that would apply to metadata as well. As long as they're not using it in every portion of the paper, you're probably all right. And I have students, we do peer review in class. I just started doing it again. I find that it's too cumbersome to do it online. So while we were remote and virtual, I didn't do peer review. But when we're in face-to-face classes, I use peer review, and I have the students exchange papers and comment. And then I have them do a self-review. And what I ask them is, what did you decide to change about your paper and why? So I have them comment on the paper there. So that comment doesn't go in the paper, but it is, I think it's a form of meta-analysis. It's they figure out, well, okay, I wanted to do this, and the reason I wanted to do it is this. And it makes them reflect a little bit. And I think that's a pretty good thing for students to do, to figure out, okay, I'm a writer and I can figure out what I want to do with my paper. So yeah, I think if you feel that you would like to have them do a little bit of meta-analysis, I think that's all right. I wouldn't require it, but if the students want to do it, it's probably acceptable.
Okay,
Anybody
thank you.
else? I don't know if I dealt with that so well, because when I was in graduate school, we didn't do that at all. But that's the thing that's come up recently, I think. Anybody else? No, not at the moment. Okay, well, I have some questions for you. So what's your greatest challenge as an ACE instructor? And I'm taking notes here.
I feel like I get done grading one paper and the next paper is coming in. It's burnout.
Oh, that's so true. Yes. Honestly, I mean, I've taught composition for 45 years or pretty close to it. And that's the life, isn't it? That really is what happens. Okay, bridging the gap between what students miss during COVID and what colleges expect. Yeah, that's an issue too, isn't it? Because it was so hard just the whole effort of trying to deal with the continual changes due to COVID. It was very, very difficult. Okay, well, I'll make note of that one. And that's something where I think what do you folks think? I feel like we just have to work out for ourselves what we can do. Do what we can to try to bring people up to speed. Yeah, it's difficult though. It really is. Now, I have to say, on our campus, the issues were probably a little different because a lot of us teach online as well as face-to-face. And so when we moved to the virtual environment, it was chaotic because it wasn't planned. But we had a toolkit, like a lot of us kind of knew things that we could do to make it work. And it's very difficult that way. Okay, my students struggle with keeping up with work and completing work. Many of them leave for various field trips and activities, and they think that because they aren't in class, they don't have work to complete. Yeah, I've watched this when I observe classes. Here's somebody who comes in 20 minutes late because she got called to the office. This is a tough one, and I think that all that you can do is just try to keep them techniques for meeting deadlines. Teach them how to budget time. I don't know if maybe you've already done this, but a little explicit time management instruction is not a bad idea. And when there's a big project, get them to fill out a little timesheet. Here's what I need to do my research. Here's what I need to write my outline. Here's how much time I'm going to need for this. Because do you remember when you went to college, what a big deal time management became for you? I do. I would feel overwhelmed, and it took me a while to figure out, okay, I have a research paper. I have to start it 2 months early before it's due. I can't just write it the night before. And so give them some time management activities to do and see if that helps them. Then that way, if they know they have an activity or field trip, they know that they have to do something before that activity or field trip. See if it helps. I don't know if there's probably not a total answer to that one, but that's really a good one. And I imagine that many people struggle with this. Am I right about that? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have another question? Or I'm sorry, another answer about your greatest challenge? Getting students to understand that quotes and paraphrase materials are part of the paper, not extras. Oh, that's a tough one. And you're probably dealing with people who haven't done a large number of research papers yet, right? Because often that's what I have in my Comp 1 on campus too. Believe it or not, there are students who get the whole way through high school and never write a research paper. It depends on what their curriculum was like in high school, you know, and a lot of community college students weren't college prep students. They didn't plan really to go to college, but now they're there. So in some ways we have the same issues here. Okay, yeah, you're right. They have to understand that the quotes and paraphrases are the building blocks of their paper and not just add-ons. Yeah. Does anybody, Jessica, have you found anything that you could do to help them?
Honestly, a lot of peer mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
Yeah,
seem to make
good.
sense when it comes from me, but if they can see it come from their peers, they can see it in some of their writing. So we do a lot of like mentor sharing.
Yes.
So if that's what it takes, that's okay.
That's true in so many areas of life, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's true with parents and children too. Parents tell kids something, but when they hear it from other people their age, they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah. At least I know I got through to some of them.
Well, that's good. That sounds great. Using examples from previous years and removing the names. Yes, that's really handy. And I have a folder on my computer for student samples. It's, yeah. That is a great technique, Clarissa. I really like that technique too. Does anybody have anything else? Okay, well, technically we've done a whole hour, but I'm going to show you my other questions before we stop. So here's the next one. What kind of support would you find most useful? Is there something that you would like from us that we can help you with? I can't guarantee being able to do anything, but is there something that you would like to have from us or from me?
This is my first year teaching this course, and I spent hours and hours looking for MLA resources. Like, how do I teach my kids to do MLA?
Oh, okay. Okay.
A PowerPoint or like a short video that I could say, here's where you're going to find your basics, and then we'll practice it.
Gee, do you want my video? I have one for my online class.
I'll take
Yeah.
any at this point, because I could have made
Okay.
it myself before by the time I got around to it.
Yes.
So-
Send me an email and I'll send you the my MLA PowerPoint right away. And I'll try to make sure that I post more things too on the ACE website. Yeah, it's nice to have some materials to work with. Oh, there is a PowerPoint on the ACE page, Clarissa. I'll have to make sure it's updated. Although I'm so thankful that the new MLA didn't change the basic structure of the entries, because I really didn't want to learn another one. Just, yeah. I think that the new MLA handbook, basically, they added a lot more examples and they went a lot more in depth, which is helpful when you have a dilemma. You know, there's more stuff there to look up, but the basic structure is pretty much the same. Okay, I'll make sure I post an update. Okay, does anybody else have anything that they'd like to ask for? All right, well, I think this question, all right, wait a minute. I have to go to previous. Okay, what resources would you appreciate? So it sounds like you'd like to have more instructional resources on the web page. Okay, I'll try to make sure we put some stuff on there. A little bit of additional stuff. Happy to do that for you. And if there are resources that you need, don't hesitate to email me. I just realized that I didn't put my email in this presentation. But I think that probably most of you have access to it. And you can always reach me through the ACE department email. Okay, they'll forward any inquiries on to me. Okay, and the last one was, how do you create the atmosphere of a college class in your classroom? Yeah, isn't that I really was just curious about that, because it can't be very easy to do. you know. What do you guys think about this one? Yeah, just give it some thought. We don't expect you to teach it exactly the way a college class is taught, for the simple reason that you have many more hours to spend on your class. Even if you're teaching a one semester course, you get more days of class meeting, you get more in-class time per week, and you have more weeks. So obviously you can do more things in class working with the students than we can. You know, I do peer review days, and on peer review days, I also review papers and I do help sessions and things like that. But, you know, we don't have as many hours to work with. But I really think that if you help students to start understanding the importance of deadlines and adult life and of time management, someday they'll appreciate that. Does anyone have anything that they want to add? I see a message in the chat. Let's see what that was. Oh, the weighted grading. Yeah, that's excellent. Clarissa says that the grading and the weighted grades is very different for students, and she reminds students that it's a college level course. That's excellent. That's what you need to do, because they're in a high school building, and it's probably pretty easy for them to forget, oh yeah, this isn't just, you know, like my other high school classes. So I think that's a great idea. I really do. Does anybody have any other ones to add? Well, I appreciate that all of you attended tonight. It was really nice to hear from you and to visit with you. If you have any questions, if you need anything, email me. I'm just going to say my email address. It's jmcdevitt at Penn Highlands, and it's jmcdevit at pennhighlands.edu. Yes, my name has 2 T's on it, but I've been at Penn Highlands so long that I only had 8 characters, so they chopped off the final T. That's how old I am. All right, so it's MCDEVIT, JMCDEVIT, and I'll be very happy to hear from any of you. All right, everybody. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of your year. And have a great, have a great break. And if you have any other questions, just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.